El proyecto Salir Adentro es un proceso comunitario que parte de lo expositivo, pasando por lo curatorial y llegando hasta lo pedagógico. Este proyecto busca reflexionar sobre dos tipos de encierro muy diferentes. Uno es la experiencia de privación de libertad y el otro es la experiencia del encierro durante la pandemia. El proceso parte de la exhibición de la Lotería Canera, un proyecto realizado por el Taller Gráfica Siqueiros de Santa María Ixcotera en Oaxaca, que nos muestra un universo de la vida dentro de la cárcel a través del lenguaje y del grabado.
¿Cómo es la vida allá adentro, ¿no? En la cárcel, cómo es la visita, cómo es la comida, cómo es cómo son, qué sueños hay ahí, cómo se duerme? Entonces se quería hacer una visita guiada por medio de imágenes, documentar toda esa vida por medio de imágenes, pero también se quería hacer muy familiar, ¿no? Que la gente pudiera, los niños, todos lo pudieran ver. Esos temas que ya son muy recurrentes, tratar de cambiarlos como por el tema familiar, por ejemplo, de cómo es la visita, cómo se vive el amor allá adentro, pero también con la imagen de la conyugal, que para mí es la imagen más acertada, ¿no? Que es una imagen que cuando se propuso hacerla, muchos tenían esta idea a lo mejor pornográfica de realizar la imagen de la conyugal. Al final el señor que la hizo una imagen muy poética, ¿no? Y el chico que escribió, Eduardo, que escribió los textos, también escribió una cosa súper bonita, muy poética, que era la luna de miel sin luna. Entonces la imagen es dos cabezas, dos caras besándose en medio de un corazón con un cuadrito encerrado, ¿no?
En el mundo del arte muchas veces se crean estas divisiones entre los artistas académicos y los artistas formados de otra forma, y creo que el hecho de exhibir la producción artística de un colectivo que se encuentra privado de libertad es darle su lugar también en el mundo del arte a las diferentes formas de producción y de creación artística. La Lotería Canera es el resultado de un proceso de largo aliento que se ha llevado a cabo en este cerezo en Oaxaca, y me parece que es un ejemplo muy, muy claro y muy logrado de cómo se puede representar o cómo se puede expresar un universo que es completamente desconocido para la gran mayoría de las personas.
El arte lo único que puede hacer es darles esa herramienta para tomar otro tipo de decisiones. El arte puede hacer que ellos emocionalmente superen cosas también, ¿no? Entonces creo que para mí el arte les cambia la vida desde el primer momento en que empiezan a hacerlo, y les afecta de manera positiva, ¿no? Pues digo, para mí la lotería ha cumplido su función, porque creo que es el primer proyecto del taller que ha abierto muchas puertas, que ha sido la llave para abrir muchas puertas. Creo que su función de la lotería ya se cumplió, porque fue con las ventas de la lotería se logró comprar la prensa que tiene ahorita el taller de Etla, del penal de Etla, y bueno, la idea es que ingrese a todos los penales del país, y que sea también esta parte que motive, ¿no?, a la demás gente a seguir haciendo cosas, a seguir desmitificando la cárcel también, porque la cárcel, bueno, sí son candados, rejas, pero también hay esta solidaridad del ser humano, ¿no?, y de los seres humanos. Entonces yo siempre que invito a las personas a ir a conocer el taller, sé que la cárcel no es un lugar bonito, pero que sin embargo dentro del taller se encuentran otras situaciones de vida que impresionan y que motivan, ¿no? Ojalá pudiéramos montar exposiciones en todo el país de la lotería. Digo, es difícil, pero creo que no es imposible. Entonces esperamos que esta lotería llegue con más gente y pues seguir propagando a partir de la lotería más ideas de las personas que están en reclusión, y que sí dar a conocer a la sociedad que todos son seres humanos, ¿no? que todos son personas pensantes y sintientes, y independientemente del motivo por el que están en reinserción, que están creando cosas grandes, ¿no? Dentro de este estado de reclusión.
El único que se encierra eres tú, ¿no? Eres libre en todas las maneras, aunque estés en la cárcel, como lo hicieron ellos en los grabados. Entonces, pues totalmente no estuvieron encerrados, ¿no? Ellos ahorita están afuera exponiendo. Están dándole voz a muchos internos, a mucha gente que, bueno, más bien los están representando. Está muy chido que pues, la gente ya esté trabajando y que volteen a ver este tipo de cosas y que los apoyen.
Lo que me transmiten las imágenes, bueno, lo que veo o entiendo, también son circunstancias de vida que se alejan un poco a lo que yo he vivido durante el encierro. Creo que en las imágenes vemos un encierro donde hay una organización y donde hay como unos estatus y como unas diferencias de formas de vida dentro de un mismo espacio que distan mucho del encierro que yo he vivido y que siento que hay, pues eso, como una organización y una historia mucho más larga que la que nosotros tenemos con este encierro, que es mucho más reciente, digamos, que tienen una experiencia y unas salidas mucho más pues trabajadas y que nosotros, ¿no? que lo que nosotros hemos vivido con el encierro de la pandemia, que sí es un encierro diferente.
Bueno, he tenido yo mucha experiencia con el encierro y puedo decir que a mí el encierro me enseñó a vivir, porque yo no era una persona que pues no valoraba, iba demasiado rápido, y esto fue así como que un límite, un freno para reflexionar acerca de mí mismo, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que estoy haciendo?
Siempre estuve encerrada, pero con la pandemia fue cuando surgieron las ganas de salir, entonces fue súper raro porque no me molestaba nunca el encierro hasta que me prohibieron salir. Fue como que ahora sí me molesta porque está prohibido.
Me ha costado mucho trabajo de repente voltear a verme y pensar en cómo estoy o qué me hace falta o cómo me siento. Como que plantear mis propias emociones y mis sentimientos y mis afectos hacia mi persona y hacia las personas ha sido todo un reto en esta pandemia.
Pues al principio de la pandemia fue algo duro porque pues usualmente debido a la escuela o las actividades que realizaba pues no estaba mucho tiempo dentro, pero pues ya después de cierto lapso que pasó pues fue un poco más llevadero.
Creo que este proyecto puede ayudar o contribuir a regresar a esta llamada nueva normalidad, pues hay cosas que han sucedido en cada una de nuestras vidas que no hemos logrado tal vez procesar de cierta forma, y esta es una oportunidad para hacerlo. No hay una receta de cómo procesar estas cosas. Son experiencias completamente nuevas a nivel mundial y simplemente este es un espacio de oportunidad para poder trabajar eso desde una herramienta artística y una convivencia creativa.
but still not silenced. When I demand for my right, them label me a rebel. But remember, I'm not a criminal. I'm not a criminal. Being political don't make me criminal. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a criminal. Speaking out don't make me no criminal. I'm not a criminal.
My right is my right. Express myself the way I want. My thoughts and my voice only represent my choice.
Natural.
Africa, wake up. Stand up for your rights.
Fight for your rights.
Mama land, get up and fight for your rights. Get up, wake up. This is the time. Get up, wake up. This is the time.
Well, don't have no fear when you stand for your rights, because you have a right to defend your rights. Don't let them tell you no lies. Never compromise your rights. They could have beat and torture you in a prison. Now you will see the book wherever season. Nobody can see you if you don't stand. Nobody can hear you if you don't shout out loud. Tell them I'm not a criminal. I'm not a criminal. Being political makes me no criminal. I'm not a criminal. Yeah, I'm not a criminal. I'm not a criminal.
आज हम आपको बताएंगे सेंसरशिप से लड़ने की आसान विधि। इसके लिए आपको चाहिए एक नींबू, एक कलम, एक रस्सी और एक रुमाल। लेकिन इससे पहले हम सुनेंगे एक कविता।
जो बहुत बोलता है उसे कम बोलना है, जो कम बोलता है उसे चुप हो जाना है, और जो है पहले से ही चुप उसे भूल जानी है अपनी भाषा। और अगर कोई ऐसा है जो जानता ही नहीं कि भाषा होती क्या है, उसे अपने मस्तिष्क में भेजकर एक सर्च पार्टी खोज निकालने हैं वो सारे न्यूरॉन जो आपस में जुड़कर, बतियाकर, किसी गहरी एवोल्यूशनरी साजिश को रचकर किसी दिन अचानक ही बन सकते हैं भाषा।
सबसे पहले रस्सी से अपने हाथ बांधिए एकदम कस के। अब आंख पे रुमाल बांध लीजिए। अब कलम खोजिए टटोल के ही नींबू भी खोजिए। और जब तक ये इंसान नींबू खोज रहा है तब तक आप एक कविता सुनिए।
सरकार को नहीं पसंद अखबार, क्योंकि पहले पन्ने पे ही देखने को मिल जाता है सरकार जैसा ही एक कार्टून। सरकार को नहीं पसंद फिल्में, क्योंकि इतनी भीड़ इकट्ठी करके भी ये फिल्म वाले कुछ तोड़ते नहीं, गिराते नहीं, सिर्फ बनाते हैं। सरकार को नहीं पसंद स्टैंड अप कॉमेडी, क्योंकि इंसानी दिमाग है विचित्र और हंसते हुए लोग 2 मिनट के लिए भूल जाते हैं डरना। सरकार को नहीं पसंद किताबें, क्योंकि उनको जलाते हुए आंख में जाता है धुआं और वो बेवकूफ भी लगते हैं। भरी गर्मी में बीच सड़क पे हाथ में पकड़े जलती हुई किताब। तो आप पूछेंगे सरकार को पसंद क्या है? सरकार को पसंद हैं आपके हाथ की रेखाएं, जिनमें लिखा है जब नहीं होंगी अखबारें, किताबें, फिल्में, तब सिर्फ सरकार होगी।
जैसा कि हमें शक था, ये आदमी अभी भी नींबू और कलम ढूंढ रहा है। हाँ, मिल गया। अब कलम से नींबू को काटने की कोशिश कीजिए। कीजिए, घबराइए मत। अगर ये नहीं होता तो कलम नींबू में घोंप दीजिए अच्छे से। सेंसरशिप से लड़ने की विधि तैयार है। आपको बस इतना याद रखना है कि सेंसरशिप आए या ना आए, नींबू नींबू ही रहेगा और कलम कलम ही रहेगी।
Poetry and music are incredibly important to Uyghur people. We use them to share our history, to tell our stories, and to express our collective identity. It is particularly painful for me that our culture, music, and language is under attack in our own homeland, East Turkestan. Since 2017, the Chinese regime have been carrying out a genocide in a broad daylight. Up to 3 million Uyghurs have been detained in concentration camps, where they face indoctrination, torture, forced sterilization, and systematic rape, as the Chinese regime violently strips away their identity. The CCP is specifically targeting our culture and religion. So many of our renowned poets, artists, musicians have vanished. Our century-old cultural tradition, Meshreb, which is unique to the Uyghur people, involving music, dance, drama, oral literature, and more, was banned as part of their crackdown, preventing our people from practicing our most sacred cultural tradition. The Meshreb is on UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding. Despite this, UNESCO has so far refused to safeguard our cultural heritage at all. So it is up to us, the Uyghur people in exile. Keeping Uyghur culture alive, including being able to sing to you today, is an important part of my activism. That is why platforms like this are vital. The song I will be singing is taken from a poem by Muhammad Abdulmajid, an Uyghur poet in exile, who lost contact with his mother many years ago. In his poem, he imagines her pain at not knowing whether her son is safe, and her longing to see him again. That longing of a mother for a missing child is common to the Uyghur experience, as millions of daughters and sons have now disappeared.
Told yolunğa qara taldi qolum duada sonra yürek bağrım doldu kan zerdan cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen yol boyga çıkıp her günü telmürüşte ötküzüp günü gahi tamga ulaymet tünni cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen girip oldum yenimde sen yok Rıza ötmeydu gel kaldı kuru kalgan mıydı tepsini açtı cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen cinim oğlum kaçan kilisen
Kilodu. Külgine yürek, canan kilodu. Lebbeydi hörler yan yan kilodu. İriydi karlar her cilvesidin. Bulbulun bolgan zaman kilodu. Tacidi hilal yıldız tünigen, kök zer libaslık sultan kilodu. Ütkür can bergen, işkıda ahdeb. Turpan pıraklık ayhan kilodu. Kandak süpekley aciz tılımda canını algıcı bir can kilodu. Visaldı yürek yarılmay tursun. Toy üstüki toy devran kilodu. Şunçilik tatlık visal lezzeti kepest kanhor kavan kilodu. Sıkılgan callar samadı lerzan, ölen toluşup çokan kilodu. İntizarlıkның sübihidur ismi, zulmetni çakkan ezan kilodu. Teyyar turunla, ey bağrı kanla, 100 yıl saklagan mihman kilodu. İntizar közle ger surap kalsa, kütken u canan kaçan kilodu. Eytip kuyumla, cevabım şu ki, yoldu u canan çapsan kilodu.
am social media. I am your voice. Use me in any way that you choose. If you share highlights, holidays and daily fits with your followers, I will reward you with comments, likes and subscriptions. I am algorithm, programmed to censor. You can find me on every device that you own collecting data. I grant you freedom of speech as long as you fit my agenda. If you speak against those in power, I send you a "you are in violation of user guidelines" message. If you continue, I suspend you. Translation: I am removing your ability to spread your ideas to the masses. I'm a human. I detect pain. I attempt to post content to raise awareness about human suffering. Missiles are raining down on innocent children. Parents are dividing family members for their protection. Billions of dollars are being pumped into apartheid regimes and corrupt systems by my Muslim brothers and sisters are being stored in concentration camps. Families are starving in a country rich in agriculture. Child labor is being overlooked by for profit. They are all crippled by wars orchestrated by I am not a robot. Human intelligence is far more superior. I rapidly adapt, use coded language to bypass the systems. The truth is only hidden when those out of space using their power_word refuse to be transparent. Dear social media and your algorithms, human survival is dependent on us protecting and caring for one another. Review your user guidelines. You are obsolete without humans.
Donuk ve güvende bilge tüm kalelerim senin. Farkını tanımlarken konuşmayı öğrendim. Keskin hatların var, tuzsuz gözyaşın. Sevdin sen yaşamayı, sanırım buna alıştın. Keskin hatların var, tatsız gözyaşın. Sevdin sen acıtmayı, sanırım buna alıştın. Buna alıştın. Keskin hatların var, tuzsuz gözyaşın. Sevdin sen yaşamayı, sanırım buna alıştın. Keskin hatların var, tatsız gözyaşın. Sevdin sen acıtmayı, sanırım buna alıştın. Buna alıştın. Buna alıştın. Buna alıştın.
I would like to start by hailing my dear friend Osman Kavala as being a symbol of freedom of expression. Osman, with whom we have worked to support developing cultural actions and initiatives in different cities of Turkey, in collaboration with European, Caucasus, and Arab countries and institutions, with Syria being among them, is now in jail for almost 4 years, and he is kept in solitary confinement. There is not yet any evidence nor a serious accusation against him. In the beginning, I was tended to think that he was a sort of a hostage, with his name on the negotiation tables of international bargainings. And as time went by, despite acquittals, international and Turkish Supreme Court decisions of release in his favor, he was and still is imprisoned. A prisoner Kafka himself will be ashamed of. I believe that Osman, being virtually and de facto tortured all these years, was simply a consequence of him being an exemplary citizen, firmly believing in fundamental rights, peace and mutual understanding among peoples. And I ended up thinking that now we are all turned into hostages as dignified citizens. I do not want to give an exhaustive, open-ended list of infringements of freedom of expression and censorship in my country. It would be too long, discouraging, hence unproductive. And I have to admit that it has become almost a corollary of artistic, intellectual, and political thought and action, so that I can now assume that it lays somehow in the very nature of governments. And it seems that it follows two patterns: the vicissitudes of successful or failed military coups, and the self-perception of power by different governments. The weak they feel, the more oppressive they become. Well, even if we abstract the Ottoman period, our soon-to-be 100-years-old republic has already created a history which could be read based on bans and censorship. I would like to stress two types of obstacles on the way of the freedom of expression. The first one being fire. We have experienced a chain of fires that were set to burn all, be it estates, crops, cultural and artistic premises, and yes, human beings, all considered unwanted. The second one is self-censorship, which becomes almost a tacit way for ill-expressed thoughts and creation. And the frequency of these two types of obstacles leads to the normalization of bans, which is the worst type. Nazım Hikmet, the worldly acclaimed poet of the Turkish language, had to flee to live and die in exile in Soviet Russia after many years spent in jail. Now, Hikmet's poems are read at each and every corner of the country. It is not surprising that a city like Berlin has become populated with artists and intellectuals from Turkey nowadays. Their expressions will always find ingenious forms and channels to subvert bans and reach their target, the people. Lastly, I would like to mention a potential threat for the freedom of expression, especially in the post-COVID-19 era. The cultural and artistic life in Turkey seems to be narrowing down between a subsidized and highly manipulated official sector and a strong private culture and art production, bringing forth the brands of industry and finance moguls. The independents, the precarious champions of freedom of expression, will have to search for all sorts of conviviality and solidarity with peers, both in the country and abroad, for survival and resilience.
I have been in prison for nearly 4 years, under arrest on 3 separate and consecutive charges. The first charge was related to the protests that sparked and spread around Turkey in 2013 against a construction project in Gezi Park at downtown Istanbul. The park happens to be near my office, and it's a place where I visited frequently, like many other residents of Istanbul. Then I was accused of planning, financing, and directing the Gezi protests. I was acquitted of this fantastic charge after months of imprisonment. On the day I was acquitted, I was rearrested on the second charge with the allegation that I had a relationship with an American academic who was allegedly involved in the organization of the aborted coup attempt of July 2016. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that my detention was not based on any evidence. It constituted a violation of the several articles of the European Convention of Human Rights, and that I should be released immediately. After this ECHR decision became final, I was arrested on a third charge, espionage.
We established a cultural organization called Anadolu Kültür, and our idea was to work outside Istanbul. We thought that there are lots of things happening in Istanbul, so we should do something in Anatolia, in Anatolian cities. And our first destination was Diyarbakır, center of the Kurdish region with a strong cultural heritage. So we established an art center there, and we hosted quite a number of contemporary art exhibitions there. We did film screenings, panel discussions. We asked curators to go there to talk with the local artists. And there are, in fact, some quite good, quite strong contemporary artists living in that region. So we wanted to contribute to the development of the artistic life there. I mentioned you about the military rule in 1980. That military rule continued much longer in that region. There was what was called emergency law. So the governors had the authority to ban, to stop whatever activities they thought not so appropriate for the security.
The charges against me included gathering information about minorities in Turkey under the guise of NGO activities, disclosing this information to foreign governments, and attempting to disrupt the relations between the minority groups and the state. Civil society activities in the field of art and culture of Anadolu Kültür, an organization of which I am the chairman of the board, were thus associated with espionage. As stated by the decision of the European Court of Human Rights and several subsequent decisions of the Committee of Ministers of the European Council, there is no concrete evidence supporting these allegations. The bill of indictment does not include any evidence, but only conspiracy theories about George Soros inciting the Arab Spring and similar social movements, and the use of non-governmental organizations by foreign intelligence services. As in the similar cases of other people, what I have been through is a striking example of the political influence on the judiciary and the erosion of legal norms in Turkey. The allegations in the 2 bills of indictment prepared against myself also reflect a mental state which has deviated from rational thought. Democratic protests are considered to be staged by foreign powers. The discussion of the problems of minorities and cultural and artistic activities addressing these problems are seen as serving the interests of foreign states. These are not determined by the prejudices of the prosecutors. They rather reflect a way of reasoning shaped by the prevailing environment of politics and political discourse.
In 1983, after the decease of my father, I started working in the company. In 1980, there was a military takeover in Turkey. There was a military period which was rather bad for the civil life, for democratic organizations, media, and so on. So in 1983, together with some colleagues, we decided to launch a journal called Yeni Gündem. Then my colleagues, my friends, developed that into a publishing house. So this place, downstairs, it was used as a warehouse for this publishing house until recently, when we decided to convert this place into a cultural center.
This type of political discourse derives from essentialist ideologies of domination, where people whose identities, beliefs, or ideas are different from those of the majority are not considered as equal members of the society, and pluralism, mixing, and hybridization are considered to be a threat to religious and national values. If we can react together when people whose ideas, beliefs, and identities are different from ours are not treated equally before the law, cannot benefit from public services equally, and are subjected to discriminatory or degrading treatment, we can significantly prevent the judiciary from being influenced by politics or ideology. I believe that contributing to the development of such a reflex of reacting against the injustices faced by others is an important part of the mission of non-governmental organizations.
Because we can have audience, we can have people from different walks of life, and it brings about really a new synergy, more universal, more critical, something needed for the transformation.
The international dimensions of the question of justice are extremely important. Conscious individuals who, as citizens of the world, are concerned with the problems of people in different countries and who develop worldwide networks of solidarity could invalidate the foreign enemy discourse used in authoritarian politics. I also believe it is essential that the rich countries where democracy and the rule of law are in force follow principled foreign policies and take more responsibility for the solution of the social and political problems that force millions of people to migrate to other countries. Civil initiatives such as the Action for Hope remind us of the importance of both such civil society initiatives and the principled foreign policy action. They make us feel the power created by being together.
Şavadari, şavadari, aman aman aman aman. Şavadari, şavadari, aman aman aman aman. Vazidin kırım bardam diney, vazidin kırım bardam.
So people usually talk about the freedom of expression within a human rights framework, about the value it has for democratic processes and as the basis for other human rights. But I think if we really want to understand the fundamental value of the freedom of expression, we have to understand what expression means to human beings. And for this, I guess we start with thinking about what makes human beings different from any other creatures in the world. And this is a question that philosophers and scientists and generally people have thought about for a long time. And one of the things they come up with, of course, is the opposable thumbs that we have, that give us a dexterity and motor skill which is denied other creatures and gives us a very unfair advantage in the animal kingdom. But does this thumb alone explain to us how we reached the moon? Does it explain how we got to the depths of the ocean? Does it explain, even more importantly, why we wanted to try in the first place? It certainly doesn't explain why in every society, in every age, in every corner of the world, people have always created art forms, music. They've given forms of expression which are physical as well as verbal. It does not explain why we nurtured crops. It doesn't explain why we invented pottery or irrigation or experimented constantly with new ways of doing things which continue to help us come up with new and complex technologies. The literature on what makes us different emphasizes the human ability for complex thoughts, which are based on observation and experiences, and imagination and curiosity. The second thing that is stressed is highly developed languages and communication. So without being expressed, human thoughts, ideas, and imagination have very little value. And without human thought and value, we are not human. And this is why it is so important, the freedom of expression. When we deny the freedom of expression to someone, we are denying them a part of what it means to be human. But of course, no two people are identical. We are all unique beings, which means that our experiences and observations lead us to different conclusions. We have different thoughts and ideas from our imaginations. Sometimes our ideas and thoughts converge and are similar, but they can also be divergent, and sometimes they're actually oppositional. And when you have different ideas, when people sit together, this leads to discussion and debate, and it leads to new ideas. Otherwise, why on earth would we do exercises of brainstorming? This is creative, collective creativity. And the divergence of opinions would not be of concern if it wasn't for the fact that human imaginations have a dark side that lead us to dark thoughts and imaginings and actions that lead and encourage violence. This is not acceptable. Human beings are quintessentially social creatures. We live in groups, and every group has for itself rules of how to engage and interact and decision making. The rules can be both written in the forms of policies, rules, and regulations, or they can be informal, unwritten, and learnt as you become part of a group. But belonging does not confer equality, and all the people in one group do not have the same amount of power. And while you have differences in different cultures and in different societies, the specifics may differ, but typically everywhere men will exercise and have greater power and over women and persons of non-binary identities. The elders will have it over youth, those who have more resources over the less resourced. And those who are also marginalized and silenced can be those who live with disabilities or are from different faiths or ethnic backgrounds. Because we are human beings, we are not perfect. And our systems are often not fair. And justice is never a given for everybody. Therefore, while we can let our imaginations run wild, the right to the freedom of expression is not absolute. Like all human rights, it is limited by the cardinal rule that you do no harm to others. This means that it does not include hate speech or incitement to violence, for instance. That is not an acceptable expression. In the end, if we want to preserve our humanity and the planet we live in, we must all strive for justice and a just system in which everyone has the right to express themselves. We must protect a plurality of views. We must understand that diversity is what makes us human. And we must learn from nature that when you have a monoculture, it depletes the soil of its nutrients. And eventually, if you continue a monoculture, you destroy the soil itself. And this is why it is absolutely critical to have freedom of expression for everyone. And we have to be able to give that freedom to everyone every day, even when, and especially when, they disagree with us and it is not what we think.
Today, I would like to briefly discuss the worrying situation of freedom of expression in Iran. You may have heard of the more well-known prisoners of conscience in Iran, as their plight makes it to international news once in a while. Yet there are so many more prisoners of conscience in the Islamic Republic of Iran than the world gets to hear about. My beloved Iranian poet, the late Simin Behbahani, once wrote, "I have put my poems forward for everyone to see. What can they be from the year 1979 onward? We wrote our books not with ink but with blood. No doubt the same is true about the works of every other poet." I would add to her words that the same is true for any other individual or group that hopes to freely express their opinions, beliefs, and grievances, may it be through arts, the press, social media, or by way of peacefully seeking justice. On the legal side of things, we know that Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ratified by Iran in 1975, partially reads that everyone shall have the right to hold opinions without interference. Article 19 further states that everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. Meanwhile, the Constitution of the Islamic Republic remains vague and inadequate when it comes to freedom of expression. Article 24 of the Constitution undermines freedom of expression, such as being deemed harmful to the principles of Islam or the rights of the public. I can go on for long about the legal and structural inadequacies of the Islamic Republic that are essentially detrimental to freedom of expression in practice. However, for the purposes of today, let us briefly talk about the stories of two human rights defenders who have ended up in prison because of their peaceful activism in Iran. The stories are, in my opinion, self-explanatory when it comes to the dire situation of freedom of expression and the courageous plight of many in today's Iran who advocate for free expression and other violated human rights when behind bars, even when behind bars. It is because of the courage, resilience, and persistence of Iran's human rights activists, artists, youth, women, minority groups, journalists, lawyers, and others that I stay hopeful despite the increasingly worrying news that emerge on the ground every single day. Let us visit Sepideh Qolian in one of Iran's most difficult prison facilities. Sepideh is a young woman human rights defender who, as a freelance journalist, was covering the news and protests related to labor rights in marginalized parts of southern Iran. She was first arrested in November 2018 when covering the protests of sugarcane workers and was rearrested in 2020. Today she remains in jail. While behind bars, the young and compassionate human rights defender that she is, Sepideh wrote a heart-wrenching book, her prison memoirs, if you will, that includes her beautiful illustrations and narratives of the ordeal that women prisoners have to endure in Iranian prisons. She begins her book by the following opening. "I fear that I will not survive. To say I'm horrified does not convey my feelings. I feel something hot running out of my body. I am entirely mute. I cannot so much as groan when they beat me.
Let us also meet Zahra Mohammadi, another young woman who endured imprisonment for her peaceful cultural work. Zahra is the director and a founding member of a Kurdish cultural association that raises awareness of the legal and cultural rights of ethnic groups in Iran. In doing so, she promotes cultural education, holding Kurdish language classes in various cities in her region in the country. She's now sentenced to multiple years in prison for her peaceful cultural work and activism. The list of such prisoners whose freedom of expression is explicitly being violated every single day is sadly long, and yet my time is short. Allow me to finish this statement by quoting yet again the courageous late Simin Behbahani, whose words I mentioned earlier on. As she has written in one of her poems, "To stay alive, you must slay silence. To pay homage to being, you must sing." As evident in the contemporary history of Iran, the country's human rights defenders, independent arts and cultural circles, and others alike will not be silenced no matter how hard the censorship and repressive apparatus of the Islamic Republic intimidates, harasses, imprisons, and kills them. Iran's human rights advocates are not even silenced while behind bars and put under excruciating conditions. The story, their story, will go on until freedom of expression is achieved, until justice is prevailed.
bu dağların karı erimez. Eser badı sabah yel bozuk bozuk. Eser badı sabah yel bozuk bozuk. Türkmen kalkıp yaylasına yürümez. Dağılmış aşiret el bozuk bozuk. Dağılmış aşiret el bozuk bozuk. Elim ermez güllerini dermeye, dilim varmaz hasta halin sormaya. Dilim varmaz hasta halin sormaya. Dört sualin cevabını vermeye, sazım düzen tutmaz tel bozuk bozuk. Sazım düzen tutmaz tel bozuk bozuk. Pir sultanım yaratıldım kul değil, zalimlerin elinden öldü. Zalimlerin elinden öldü. Dost bana yazmış ki çabuk gel deyim, gelemem sevdiğim yol bozuk bozuk. Gelemem sevdiğim yol bozuk bozuk. Gelemem sevdiğim bu.